So the presentation itself was put together by myself and Myles at Weather Innovations. So just going to skip ahead to the outline. So we'll talk a little bit about what CoCoRaHS is, kind of why the MSC, or Environment Climate Change Canada, is involved with it, our interest in our role. Some basic information about measurements and submitting the reports, or down to some of the nitty-gritty details on that, although I won't go into too much detail. A little bit about our network expansion since 2012, the volunteer registration process and partnership with INAC, and Myles is going to talk about that. So I'll be passing the mic over to him partway through the presentation. A little bit about some of the challenges in recruiting and what some of the volunteers have experienced, and then some examples of how we use the data and the quality of the data. And then right toward the end, I'll ask Francis to provide his thoughts on being a volunteer. He's been with the program nearly since the beginning, so he's got a lot of years of experience as a volunteer, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. And perhaps what we'll do is just leave the questions toward the end. We do have a fair number of slides to go through, so I just want to make sure we get through all of that before we get onto the questions. So CoCoRaHS, it stands for the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. I provided the website address there for that. So the presentation itself is going to be shared after the meeting, so you folks will have all this information. It is a volunteer community-based monitoring program, precipitation monitoring program. And as far as inputting data to the database, that's done through either a website or Android or iPhone operating system apps on smartphones. The network itself developed back in the late 90s out of the Colorado State Climate Center by Nolan Doskin, who was the Colorado State climatologist for many years. It's about 18,000 volunteers in the US that are participating on a regular basis. And CoCoRaHS came to Canada in around 2011, and that's really when we got involved, and it's been a gradual expansion ever since then. It first started in Manitoba and then gradually spread to the rest of the provinces. So as of this month, there's about 650 active volunteers in Canada, which is pretty substantial for our smaller population. So in Canada, as I mentioned, Myles at Weather Innovations, they're the folks that manage the program. It's not managed by Environment and Climate Change Canada. So they manage it as a not-for-profit within the Weather Innovations organization. As I mentioned, we've been involved since about 2012 with others, Weather Innovations, Agriculture, Agri-Foods Canada, CoCoRaHS USA. We are a supporting member, and we assist with recruitment and management of the network and website development, database development, that type of thing. Early on, we recognized there was a need for some support, financial support, so we also provided financial support for about 4 years between 2013 and 2017. And overall, it's a very well-managed network. The observing procedures that the CoCoRaHS volunteers use is very similar to what we use within Environment Climate Change Canada. So using the CoCoRaHS network as supplemental to our own network was a good fit because the data has similar quality characteristics. And I'll just go on to the next slide. Just to kind of make it, oops, I will have to go back to the previous slide. There we go. Just to make it clear why we need more data. I've just brought up a map here of Northern Ontario, and it shows the Environment Canada weather stations. Some of those are automatic weather stations, some are airports. And then we do have a few CoCoRaHS stations as well, mostly in the southern areas. So as you can see, there's lots of holes. Precipitation can vary widely over relatively small distances. So having more data helps us in determining, how significant a severe precipitation event is, how widespread it is, and how severe it is. So what is collected? So the picture on the left there, that's the precipitation gauge. Do you folks see by mouse when I'm mousing over the images?
Yes.
Good. My pointer. So this is a little bit okay. So just to give you a rundown on what the gauge looks like, it's a relatively low cost, simple gauge, but it's also a very high quality professional grade precipitation gauge. Has a funnel in the top, a 4-inch outer cylinder, and then about a 1-inch inner graduated cylinder. So precipitation that falls into the gauge goes right down into the measurement graduated cylinder, so you can measure off the precipitation. And it holds about 1 inch or 25 millimeters of rainfall. And if you get more than that, which we often do with severe events, then the precipitation will essentially just overflow into the outer gauge, so you don't lose any. And so you can, if you had a 75 or 100 millimeter event, it would be no problem measuring that. So I mentioned and so this equipment is very similar to what we use in the MSC. I just want to point out as well that if you go to the CoCoRaHS website, you'll see extensive online training materials in the form of slideshows, videos, etc. And essentially, once a volunteer registers, pretty well all of the information that they need to get going, set up their gauge, order their gauge, learn about how to do the measurements. It's really all online. So the other than the rainfall, we also measure snowfall on a daily basis. So this is what the gauge looks like in the wintertime. You take out the funnel and the graduated cylinder because, of course, that's not going to work very well for snowfall. So we just measure the snow directly in the gauge like this and get the water content of it, and that's what's reported. In addition to the water content of the snow, there's a few additional measurements that are made, and that would be the depth of snow done with a ruler, and as well the total depth of snow on the ground. So there's sort of the daily snowfall, but then there's also the snowpack depth, which is important as well for users of the data. Couple optional measurements that are done, and we certainly encourage volunteers to do this, is to also do snow cores, and that provides a more accurate sampling of both the new snowfall and the snow on the ground in terms of the water content or snow water equivalent we call SWE value. Picture at the bottom, that's Nolan Doskin. He's the fellow that got the network going in the US, and he's just doing a measurement there of the new snowfall on a snowboard, and then also another picture of doing a snow core with the extra outer cylinder. Maybe I'll just pause there for a moment in case there are any questions.
Yeah, questions from anyone? Can I just pop up in a question which I think might be on the lips of some people? The water content does that mean that the snow has to be melted indoors, and the level in the tube needs to be taken?
Yep, good question. Yeah, there's two ways of doing it. Sort of the standard method that I think most volunteers do is they would bring it inside and melt it, and then either by just letting it melt or adding warm water to it, and a measured amount of warm water to it, and then pouring off the measured amount and then measuring how much precipitation there is. Sort of an easier and frankly more accurate and quicker way to do it is to weigh it. So we do have some material on the website about how to weigh the precipitation and get the water content out of it. So I do that myself. Many volunteers do. And you could just use relatively inexpensive nutrition scale, weighing in grams, and it's very easy to get the water content that way. Literally, it's about a 2-minute job. Okay, I'll continue on.
Yeah, thanks, Rick.
Yeah, I just wanted to show a snapshot of so when you log into the website and you get your account and you go into the My Data section, which is where you put in your daily observation. This is what it looks like. Some of the information is pre-filled, such as the precipitation amount comes pre-filled, as well as your observing time. And you would pick an observing time sometime in the morning. It's done once a day, generally between about 6 and 9 a.m. So that would be sort of part of your registration package. You would determine what's a convenient time for you to report. So it's a matter of reading off your gauge and putting in the water content here, whether it be snowfall or rainfall. And then if there is any snowfall, you report your ruler measurement here in centimeters. And if you've done a core value, then your water content in millimeters here. And then the other one is the total snow depth, so that would be snowpack depth, again done with a ruler, and it's multiple measurements. It's not just a measurement in one spot. We need to the volunteers will do multiple measurements to get a good average of the snowfall. And then on Mondays, if you're real keen and you want to do a water content of this total snowpack, those are entered each Monday, so not every day. It's just done once a week in the winter months. And then the other information at the bottom is, again, optional, and if you happen to be around and you observe the time that precipitation began or ended, or when it was heaviest, then some of that stuff can be reported as well as if there was any flooding. And again, that's not always easy to do that, especially if you've got a job and you're off working and you're away from your home, away from your gauge for the day, so you wouldn't necessarily be able to do that, but some folks are able to. So I mentioned we've got about 650 stations across Canada. There's been slow and steady expansion since about 2012. CoCoRaHS, and Myles may talk a little bit more about this when I hand the mic over to him, but they've worked with many different groups across Canada to get volunteers as part of the program, agricultural associations, watershed and conservation authorities, several First Nations groups, schools, universities, etc., and even some of our MSC severe weather watchers that we have been recruited into the program. General public, a lot of folks find out about it just through the website or social media, etc. CoCoRaHS has a pretty significant web presence in terms of their website. They're also active on Facebook and Twitter, although we're not putting stuff up there every single day, but probably every few days, or maybe is depending on what's going on, could be once a week. But there is some social media content there as well. And many volunteers discover the program through either social media or the website. And any of you who have the weather app, Environment Canada's weather app, may have seen a little information piece that we did on CoCoRaHS a couple of weeks ago. I think it's about 10 days ago now, highlighting the program and what it's about, and trying to get the word out there to get folks interested as volunteers. And so that was quite successful. This will be the second time we've done it. And so with that piece, I think we ended up with about just over 40 volunteers that registered for the program as part of that promotion that we did 10 days ago. Just to give you a little indication of the network growth, as I mentioned, started in 2012 in Manitoba. And this is a snapshot for September of each year, the number of active stations. So grew pretty rapidly up to 2016. We've had a little bit of a lull since then. Some volunteers drop off because they've got other interests or other priorities. But in general, fairly steady since about 2012. But we do have a nice uptick in 2020 this year. So we just looked at that, and we've got about 650 active stations, 653 active stations as of September 2020. So some of the promotional work I think that we've done over the last year or so has helped bring the numbers up. Just a rough indication of the spread of stations across the country. As you know, no surprise, in the more populated areas, we've got more stations. As you get into the more rural areas where lower populations are, it's tougher to do recruiting, and there's just not as many people to recruit. So very few stations in the north, and we're working on that, as well as other parts of Canada, like Northern Ontario, where there's a few, but there's not very many. And so we're hoping to make some headway there with you folks on that. Okay, so I'm going to turn the mic over to Myles, because he's going to talk now about the registration process, etc. So go ahead, Myles, and I'll flip the slides for you. Just let me know.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Hi, good morning, everybody. Myles Weishar here. I'm the National Volunteer Coordinator for the CoCoRaHS Network in Canada. I work for a company, Weather Innovations, and we manage the network based here out of Chatham, Ontario. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about the registration process for volunteers. It's a pretty easy process. Takes only a minute or two to fill out the application form. Once they have filled that out and registered, they're assigned a station number right here. CAN on 6 is an example. That's our station here in Chatham. So that'd be CAN for Canada, country, province, and then a number. And then once they've registered, they'll immediately receive their login information on the website for the website and mobile app. And then sort of my job for the administration part is to go in and verify the coordinates that we ask them to input on their registration form. And if they don't, then to try and locate it myself. And once the coordinates are put in there, they're assigned a station name. And so an example, our station here is Chatham 6.5 SW, and that means that our station is 6.5 kilometers southwest from the center of the nearest town, Chatham. And that sort of just helps identify on the map, or if somebody's just looking at the station name, to identify roughly where they're located. And then in addition to that, we ask on the registration form if they were referred to the network by anybody or a group maybe that they're associated with. So for example, if Weather Innovations had 10 of our employees that all signed up and registered, you could include the abbreviated name at the end there, and then that way when you're looking at the map, you could identify all of them as being part of that group. And then once the station is administered that way, the email is sent to the volunteer, and that station name and ID is included in that email to them. Also, some additional information on how to set up their gauge, some reporting tips, links to training documentation and that kind of thing. And then also how to order a gauge. So if you want to flip the slide there, Rick. So now that they've been administered, they can order a rain and snow gauge. We ship the equipment and do the ordering for the equipment here out of our office in Chatham. So it costs roughly $50 or so, including shipping and all that, to the volunteer. And they can order directly through me by email. And yeah, so once, or in addition to that, if they are part of a group, and sometimes we have groups who order a bulk allotment of gauges and they distribute them to volunteers who then register. If they've already received a gauge then and registered, then they have that information already to install their gauge and immediately begin reporting. So like Rick mentioned, observations are ideally reported each morning between 5 and 9 a.m. We have that window so that there's a cutoff time there of 9 a.m. for the data to show up on the map. And there's an example of the map here down below. And then immediately once they've registered, it becomes available on that map or on the website in data report form. So when you click on each one of those individual dots, you can see the information there that they've input. So if you want to, next slide there, Rick. And so some more information that they're given and that we recommend for volunteers is that we encourage daily reporting, like I said, but obviously not always possible to do that. So there is a multi-day reporting option. So that, say, if somebody is away for a weekend and they return and they've gotten some rain or snow accumulation in their gauge and they want to still be able to report that, they can do so as a multi-day report. And then also we encourage zero reports on the map. Many people think that we just want to know when it has rained or snowed, but zero reports are just as important. They can help identify isolated storm events potentially. As you can see on the map there, I chose, I think this was last week out east your way, Rick, there, but obviously lots of rain in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but to the west of you there, not much going on in Ontario or in the States there. So it can help identify that. Also, many zero reports in any given time could signify potential drought areas and that kind of thing. So we encourage zero reporting as well. And then like Rick mentioned, there is a mobile app free to download on iOS and Android devices that makes reporting in the morning a little easier, especially for rain reports, because you can just go out with your phone and take a quick measurement and input it right then on your phone. It's also nice because it keeps all of your records there as well, so it's easy to go back and look at that. And like I said, take very little time for rain measurements, a few minutes each morning, and then a little bit more time for snow measurements because it's a little bit more involved, but still not too bad. And then, like I said, the main point for volunteers to get their training and some more information on how to get started and to report is all done online through a variety of different training documents that are prepared and put online. If you want to go to the next slide, Rick. So I just wanted to talk for a minute here about our partnership with the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada group. We got involved with them a few years ago. They had some funding to put towards some climate and citizen science initiatives across Canada. So it was a great fit for CoCoRaHS and to purchase an allotment of gauges. They purchased about 50 to distribute to some of their contacts across Canada. And some of the examples here are a big one was sending 20 of them out to the Micmac Confederacy at PEI, and that turned out to be a really successful project there because they had somebody with boots on the ground to actually go out and install and train the individuals. So they've had a good uptake there, as well as a reporting site going out to Gift Lake Metis Settlement in Alberta, one out to George Gordon First Nation in Saskatchewan, 3 for the Manitoba Metis Federation, so kind of spread across the prairies there. And then some others that are distributed to schools and other communities that we're working with them to try and get engaged with school going back now in this fall. So working with them. And then a big part of this project with INAC was to create sort of a comprehensive training document, easy to follow, something that incorporated some information from 2 or 3 of the other documents we have online. So it's an all-in-one sort of plain language, easy to follow document that the link is right there. And so that's something that is posted online and can be accessed to. And it was included in each of the gauges that went out as well to each of these First Nation communities. And then actually that is being translated to French in the next month or so, so that'll be posted. And I'm not sure if Rick touched on that, but a lot of our website and content online is translated to the French language. So we're continually working on doing more of that as well. And then just another point is that in addition to working with INAC, we work with a lot of other groups such as conservation authorities. We've had good success with conservation groups increasing the numbers, especially in Ontario. We're working with over 10 across Ontario that have really helped Ontario grow, and so we're trying to use that same model in other provinces and try to get other groups involved, such as Alberta. We've worked with Bow River Basin Council out there who've helped. So just finding different ways of attracting volunteers, because the big thing with CoCoRaHS is the more data points, the better for everybody viewing the data, the more accurate it becomes, paints a better picture. So having groups like that to increase the numbers substantially like that really helps everybody who can view the data online. So I think that's everything for me, Rick.
Great, thanks, Myles. All right, we'll continue on. Just a little bit on some of the challenges with recruiting and retention. So based on the experience we've had in Canada and the US as well, that although you may recruit and register 100 volunteers and get some of them reporting, the bottom line is that only about 30% remain long term, and this is just a fact that we deal with. It's I don't think there's really much we can do to improve that number. You know, sometimes people are very enthusiastic when they get going and they're all excited and they're reporting every day for the first couple of weeks, and then they lose a bit of interest. The newness of it wears off, and they disappear, or they you know, they're busy with other things, and so it's not as important. But the core network that we have, which represents about 30% of the total number of registered volunteers, which is just over 2,000 since the beginning of 2011. We've got a good core network right now of 650, and most of them are reporting pretty much daily, and we've had very few problems with errors in reports, etc. Wintertime presents another more challenges for volunteers. We do lose some volunteers during the winter months. There are some that prefer just to report during the warm months, the spring through the fall, because maybe due to age or other circumstances, they aren't able to participate as regularly in the wintertime, and the network can certainly accommodate that. I mean, we appreciate any reports that we get. So the fact that some drop off in the winter is not a big deal, but of course we encourage folks to report all year round if they can. In Newfoundland in particular, we did lose quite a few of our volunteers after the first winter. Anybody that's familiar with the climate and weather in Newfoundland knows that it can be very severe there, and it can be quite a challenge. I mean, imagine trying to measure, 80 centimeters of snow with 100-kilometer-an-hour winds. It's pretty challenging. So that's something we deal with, but there are many that have continued on as well. Data usage. So just a little bit of a snapshot of how we're using the data, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how others use the data as well. But our forecasters and our services people are using the data pretty much on a daily basis, in providing some supplementary precipitation information to folks like the media, and it also goes out in our storm summary reports that are issued by our storm prediction centers. So we may have a list of precipitation, could be a snowfall event, and that would be, data from our airports and other volunteer networks, as well as the CoCoRaHS network. At the MSC, we've got some automated precipitation mapping, and the CoCoRaHS data is used in that mapping as well, and I'll show you an example of that a bit later on. We're also, in some cases, we're able to use the CoCoRaHS data to help with quality control of our own data. So occasionally we have problems with our automatic weather stations, or we have some doubtful data from an airport, and so oftentimes we're able to use the CoCoRaHS data to help validate that information. And our forecasters are also using the data in real time to help validate and improve the performance of their forecasts and warnings. So, you know, that's something, it's got a feedback. Forecasters don't just forecast the weather, but they look at actually what happened, and they use that information to help improve the quality of the forecast going forward. So this is a map. This is what I refer to as our CAPA mapping, Canadian Precipitation Analysis, issued by Environment Canada. So the CoCoRaHS data, where it is available, is included in this map, and this happens to be a precipitation anomaly map. So essentially it's how much precipitation fell in the month of August versus normal. And so if it was near normal, it would be in the white range. If it was above normal, it would be in the green and brown range. And if it's below normal, drier than normal, it's in the darker brown. So it looks to me like Northern Ontario had some precipitation deficits in August, possibly some impacts on agriculture, some of the agricultural areas there as well. Just another example of snowfall mapping. So again, this is part of the mapping that Environment Canada produces, and the CoCoRaHS reports are included in this as well. So this would be total snowfall from the month of March of 2020, showing amounts across Northern Ontario exceeding 50, maybe up to 75 centimeters in the month of March in some areas, especially near the lakes and further north. So Agri-Foods Canada is also using the CoCoRaHS data on a regular basis. It's automatically ingested into their drought monitor program, and so every month they issue a snapshot of drought conditions across Canada, whether it be yellow for abnormally dry conditions, moderate, severe, extreme drought, etc. So this data is very helpful to them and the agricultural community in assessing drought across the country. And you'll notice in the Maritimes we had some pretty unusual drought out here. We don't usually have severe to extreme drought, but we did back in August. This is a little bit dated, but it's a database out of the US that uses precipitation data to help inform flood forecast agencies, especially for the spring months, about the potential for flooding. And so it includes information such as snow depth and the water content of the snow depth. And not all flood forecast agencies use this information, but it's used by many, and it helps with flood forecasting. And again, the CoCoRaHS data, both the US and Canada, is included in this data set. Just an example from the Maritimes, and I apologize, I don't have one from Ontario, but this would be from Hurricane Dorian that moved through in September of last year. So we have used precipitation data both from our network and the CoCoRaHS network. So you can see there's lots of dots on the map. This is New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island. And this is the trajectory of Dorian as it came on shore. And so many of you will have recognized from media reports that there was a lot of impact in the Maritimes, both from wind and rain from Dorian. And some of you may remember the collapsed crane at the top of the building that was under construction. Well, that happened in the Halifax area. So this data, this CoCoRaHS data, helped a lot in this particular map, we have 165 CoCoRaHS reports, including reports from Maine as well. Some of the media folks are also using CoCoRaHS data. You may have seen it on some of the newscasts in Ontario. Again, I'm sorry, I don't have any examples from Ontario, but out here in the Maritimes, we see it fairly regularly on CBC, especially CBC. I think Global is using it as well on CTV. CTV certainly using the CoCoRaHS data. So here you can see they've identified reports coming from both the NAVCAN airports and CoCoRaHS a day last winter. Data quality, I mentioned data quality has generally been very good based on feedback as well as our screening of the data on a daily basis. We do some spatial screening of the data and look for potential errors. Sometimes there's a decimal point error, so the person has input 100 millimeters instead of 10 millimeters. Well, these types of simple errors are fairly easy to pick up looking at the map. And between myself and Myles and a few other people, we do some follow-up when there is errors when there are errors in the data. We do follow up with a volunteer to confirm whether there's an error or not, and if there is, then we either make the correction or ask them to make the correction. Nationally, obvious errors are pretty infrequent. We might have a few a week, but that's about it, and that's pretty minimal for a network of 650 or so. This is just the link for registration, and I think Myles provided that on a previous slide as well and talked about the registration process and ordering gauges, so I won't delay on that. And maybe I think we're still got about 10 minutes, but I'm going to give Francis a chance now to talk about his experience. He's one of our earlier adopters to the CoCoRaHS program in New Brunswick. He's located in Bathurst. And so Francis, I'm going to turn the mic over to you and talk a little bit about your experience as a volunteer, and you want to talk about some of the challenges and some of the benefits. That would be great.
Well, thanks very much, Rick. And just to give folks a bit of an idea of my background, one of my hobbies is amateur radio, commonly known as ham radio. And probably since early 90s, approximately 1994, I got involved with the CANWARN program. CANWARN is an acronym for the Canadian Weather Amateur Radio Network. And we are activated by fellow radio amateurs, usually in the Fredericton area, and will report of severe weather will be passed on to them, and they will in turn pass it on to the weather office in Fredericton. But I think now that's being passed on to Dartmouth, and it is collected. In 2013, in fact, it was Rick Fleetwood that came to one of our provincial amateur radio meetings and did a presentation on CoCoRaHS. And didn't take me long to realize that this would tie in very nicely to what I was already doing and learn more about weather. If there's one thing the folks in Canada, and I know especially in the Maritimes, we don't take for granted is the weather. And there's almost an inside joke here in the Maritimes. If you don't like the weather, wait half an hour, it's bound to change, and it's never been so true. We spend a lot of time talking about it, whether it's the guy on the street, the amateur radio guys on the air. We always, seem to be talking about weather. So this whole experience with CoCoRaHS for me has been fantastic. I would promote this for anyone. I like to hear the idea of bringing it into schools, getting the students starting off early. Great career, field to get into, great hobby, a pastime, because we are all affected by climate change and weather, and it's a great way of seeing the impact. As Rick was mentioning, this year it has been a very, very dry summer here in the Maritimes, and we don't take that too lightly. I mean, food to table, the farmers were heavily affected. So a lot of the data that we collect and share, whether it be online or even through our radio network, is passed on and used by various groups. So for me, this has been a tremendous interest of hobby to be involved. We discuss it with one another. We compare information. We do have one regular radio group that gets together from about mid-November to about mid-April, sometimes later, depending on the snowpack. And we, compare the snow and rain precipitation that we've had from across the province and look at the impacts along the St. John River that has a nasty habit of flooding every other year and sometimes even 2 years in a row. A lot of this data from the snowpack adds up to a lot of pertinent information where we can see things impacting how maybe the ice jams on the St. John River are going to move. There's a small river in my area here in Bathurst that affects not that many people, but nonetheless, if they have to be evacuated, we can see ahead of time, and Emergency Measures New Brunswick can take this data and really decide, well, maybe we should consider the possibility of evacuating residents. Overall, folks, if you decide to get involved with CoCoRaHS, you will not regret it. It is a really interesting program. There's so much to learn. The data we share and the friends you make, second to none. And I see the clock is ticking away. I have a bad habit of talking too much, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to try to be quiet, and if anyone has any questions, I know Rick or Myles will be glad to take them. And if you want it from a backyard kid, I'll be glad to answer your questions as well. I'll turn it back to you, Rick.